It happened. Trump has started the countdown timer. The countdown to the end of the war has begun. Shock from Geneva. The peace plan has been rewritten. Tough traps are being prepared, but for whom? About all the secret negotiations and behind-the-scenes agreements. Coming up.
The negotiations in Geneva regarding Trump's peace plan are of crucial importance. Representatives from the US, Ukraine, and national security advisors from France, the UK, and Germany took part in them, according to the American draft plan for ending the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine is approaching this process with a clear understanding of its interests. This is another stage of the dialogue that has been ongoing in recent days, and above all, is intended to coordinate the vision for further steps.
Trump's aides, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived at the meeting.
The meeting was the most productive and substantive of all those held so far. In
the Ukrainian president's office, they are ready to work as quickly as possible to achieve real peace.
Ukraine never wanted this war and will do everything to end it with a just peace. Ukraine will never be an obstacle to peace, and representatives of the Ukrainian state will defend the just interests of the Ukrainian people and the foundations of European security, grateful for the willingness of European partners to help.
Ukraine's allies are seeking to rewrite Trump's proposal, which they believe would benefit Russia. They disagree with at least 4 points.
We firmly adhere to the principle that borders should not be changed by force. We are also concerned about the proposed restrictions on Ukraine's armed forces, which would leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attacks. This is tantamount to military castration and would leave Ukraine permanently vulnerable to a third invasion.
The leaders of European states agreed to take the draft as a basis and express their willingness to work on it together.
We have very good progress, and we are moving towards a just and lasting peace. Ukrainians deserve peace more than anyone else on this planet. We believe that our great friend, the United States, especially President Trump and his team, will confirm this peace.
Keith Kellogg is confident that Trump will be able to end this war.
The basis of the agreement has already been formed. We are almost on the home stretch to ending the war. There are things in the plan that are better to spell out and explain. There will also be security guarantees, with the United States as the main guarantor to avoid the mistakes of the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk agreements.
The media are now reporting that Trump has appointed Driscoll, a friend and former classmate of Vice President J.D. Vance, as his new special representative. It is quite possible that he will work in parallel with Keith Kellogg, who may leave the administration in January. Washington continues to insist on advancing its 28-point plan. According to it, Ukraine must make territorial concessions to Russia and reduce its army. The US and Europe pledged to finance the reconstruction of Ukraine. Sanctions on the Russian Federation are gradually lifted. And Moscow and Washington sign an agreement on long-term economic cooperation?
This is not our recommendation. This is not our peace plan. This is a proposal that was received, and as mediators we agreed to share it. And we did not make it public. It leaked. It was not made public by our members or our representatives.
Donald Trump believes that Ukraine may decide to sign the peace plan on November 27th before Thanksgiving. But when meeting with journalists, he indicated that his peace plan is far from a final proposal.
No, it is far from final. We would like to achieve peace. This should have happened a long time ago. The war between Ukraine and Russia should never have happened. If I had been president, this would never have happened. We are trying to end it. One way or another, we have to end it. On
Friday, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the people of Ukraine, stating that the country now faces a very difficult and challenging choice and risks either losing its national dignity or its most important and key international partner.
This is one of the most difficult moments in our history. Right now, the pressure on Ukraine is among the heaviest we've ever faced. Now, Ukraine may be faced with a very difficult choice. Either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner.
Sources close to the Kremlin say that the provisions of this document should be seen more as a basis for a future agreement, rather than as an agreement that Putin will officially sign.
If Kyiv does not want to discuss President Trump's proposal and refuses it, then both they and the European warmongers must understand that the events that took place in Kupansk will inevitably be repeated. And on other key sections of the front as well. Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but inevitably it will keep happening. And overall, we are fine with that.
Moscow objects to the proposed security guarantees for Ukraine, the size of its army, and the use of frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine.
We have this text. We received it through the existing channels of communication with the American administration. I believe that it could also serve as a basis for a final peaceful settlement.
The Kremlin is creating informational conditions to reject the agreement, since Russia is not interested in making territorial concessions, according to the American Institute for the Study of War.
A Russian victory is not inevitable. Ukraine and the West can exploit several key Russian weaknesses to force the Kremlin to negotiate and make real concessions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is facing growing problems with material and human resources, which will continue to complicate Moscow's ability to sustain the war as it drags on. Therefore, the Russian Federation is very interested in forcing Ukraine to surrender critically important territories that the Russian military is unlikely to be able to capture. That is why Gerasimov, when reporting the situation at the front to Putin, continues to exaggerate successes, and Putin plays along in order to force Ukraine and the West to accept Russia's demands in negotiations.
Shock! Britain and France are landing troops in Ukraine. Their forces are already at the border. Europe is in battle. Putin is torn apart with rage, a diplomatic apocalypse, the Kremlin has crossed the Rubicon, and the West delivers a stab in the back. Leaks from headquarters: Russia is losing all its trump cards and the Ukrainian armed forces are armed to the teeth. This is the end for Moscow? See all the details. In the United Kingdom and France, troops are being prepared for possible deployment to Ukraine. And all this is happening precisely at the moment when the US is promoting its own peace plan. A document consisting of 28 points, where one of the key elements directly demands there must be no NATO troops on the territory of Ukraine.
We, Europeans, have always supported a strong and just peace and welcome any efforts to achieve it. Of course, for any plan to work, Ukrainians and Europeans are needed, so this is absolutely clear. We also need to understand that in this war there is one aggressor and one victim. That's why we haven't heard about any concessions from Russia. I mean, if Russia really wanted peace, it could have agreed to an unconditional ceasefire some time ago. Meanwhile, we are once again witnessing the bombing of civilians.
According to Bloomberg, the United Kingdom has already identified specific military units that can be rapidly deployed to Ukraine. Defense Minister John Gilly stated that London has updated its plans to send troops to Ukraine as part of a coalition of the willing, which involves about 30 countries led by the United Kingdom and France.
We have conducted reconnaissance in Ukraine, so we know which units will be used, how to deploy them, and what tasks they can perform. The plans will be coordinated with other coalition members depending on Ukraine's needs and the terms of any peace agreement.
In fact, London is forming the framework for a future presence, the very one that is supposed to take effect immediately after a possible peace agreement. Britain is already allocating more than £100 million for these purposes, which is about $130 million. This money is for the initial expenses of sending troops.
There is ongoing contact between Ukraine and its partners regarding needs and the situation. This is one of the channels which is meant at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at the level of various departments and different coordination groups that have been established between Ukraine and its partners. This information is communicated. Ukrainian assessments. On the other hand, the partners have direct contacts with civil society organizations in Ukraine through donor organizations and a whole range of contacts at the embassy. Accordingly, they receive assessments from localities, regions, oblasts, from mayors, from local governments, and from local activists. They also receive information about situations that are happening and about needs. The third point is that intelligence services and analytical centers are also at work. Therefore, it can be stated with complete certainty and full responsibility that the partners have an excellent understanding of the situation and the needs that exist.
The plans include stationing contingents farther from the front line and continuing the training of Ukrainian units both in Britain and directly in Ukraine. After the signing of the peace agreement, a coordination center is to begin operating in Kyiv under the leadership of a British two-star officer. Its tasks include logistics, armament, training, the restoration of Ukraine's ground forces, as well as ensuring air security necessary for the resumption of international air travel. A separate component is the expansion of the Black Sea Naval Group formed by Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria. Minesweeping, securing shipping routes, and restoring maritime exports. According to London's plan, these elements are intended to become key for the post-war period.
If there is a deployment on the continent, British units will be stationed far from the conflict zone. Obviously, this refers to Western Ukraine, where they are already present now. According to my information, we know that there are a significant number of American military instructors present who are training not only in logistics, but in other areas as well. Accordingly, this also concerns instructors, and as a result, for the time being, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever to expect or anticipate that in the event of a peace process or negotiations, foreign troops, military personnel, or any external armed forces will be stationed, deployed, or positioned along the line of contact or the border area. In other words, what is happening now will simply continue without any significant changes. It is quite possible, for example, to talk about the possibility of replacing American instructors or American military personnel with British military personnel instead.
Right now, Ukraine and its European partners are facing a difficult choice. On the one hand, there is the need to provide reliable security guarantees and maintain stability after a possible agreement. On the other hand, there is the risk of going beyond the American plan, thereby provoking a new round of pressure from Russia, or even undermining the very architecture of the future peace agreement.
Right now, there is a bloody massacre in Pokrovsk, where entire platoons of occupiers have vanished into hell. The deadly trap has snapped shut. It is impossible to count the Russian losses. These battlefield images will shock you. Watch further for all the latest details from the front line.
In the past 24 hours, 3 platoons have been eliminated and more than a platoon wounded. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine shared details of the battles for Pokrovsk. Thus, the defense forces destroyed exactly 60 Russian assault troops who, in the fog, tried to advance toward the city center and gain a foothold. Another 23 people were wounded. As a result, the occupiers' attempt to break through failed. At the same time, the enemy is still holding the old positions they took several days ago. According to the command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, search and assault operations are currently underway, and the entire city effectively remains a gray zone.
The enemy, who entered through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, has already established a certain foothold there, but the foothold is already being supplied logistically. Accordingly, the gray zone is very large. Today it covers most of the city, although the lines on the northern edges of the city in the northern part of Pokrovsk are currently being held by our paratroopers in particular.
Another direction that regularly appears in military reports is the Kupansk area. Despite Gerasimov's report about encircling around 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers there, our command denies this information. On the contrary, they are reporting successes and the advance of the defense forces.
Today it has not yet been possible to push the enemy out of Kupiansk itself, but the counter-attacking actions demonstrated by the defense forces today are steady advances. These are not any sudden counter-offensive operations, they are specifically counter-attacking actions. Nevertheless, this is allowing our defense forces to regain some tactical positions that were lost there several weeks or even months ago, specifically within the city of Kupiansk itself.
The Russians have also become more active in the south of our country. The Zaporizhzhia direction, from where the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine was drawing reserves to Pokrovsk, has been bringing rather alarming news for several weeks. However, the situation has now been stabilized.
The active offensive that they declared a week ago is no longer taking place. Now we are striking and using firepower against their reserves. It is especially important that we have now started destroying the railway that supplies these groups.
Analysts say that the situation in Zaporizhzhia remains difficult. The enemy continues to concentrate forces and, using sabotage groups, infiltrates villages under Ukrainian control near the Kakhovka reservoir. However, these attacks repeatedly end in failure.
Once again, the Russians were unable to take Stepnohirsk or even the multi-story buildings in the southern part of the settlement. Only part of the buildings are under enemy control. Additional pressure on Stepnohirsk is created by the enemy's attempts to break through along the road to Hrihorivka. To the north of the seaside dachas, there is a large open area, so the Russians don't even try to gain a foothold there. Instead, taking great risks, they dash a bit further north, where there is a building and at least some kind of trench line.
But as the enemy advances in open fields, our artillery inflicts colossal losses on them, which is why the occupiers are no longer given vehicles and are sent into the assault exclusively on foot. At the same time, our defense forces managed to strike not only along the front line, but also deep in the Russian rear. In particular, the past day was marked by an unprecedented event. Special Operations Forces shot down a Russian Mi-8 military helicopter with a long-range drone directly over Russian territory. As noted by the agency, this opens a new chapter in the war, giving the Ukrainian armed forces capabilities never seen before.
The thing is, previously helicopters in the air. Previously, Ukrainians used regular FPV drones with a maximum range of just a few dozen kilometers and warheads weighing 1.5 kilograms. In this case, however, we see that it wasn't necessary to ram the drone into the helicopter thanks to the powerful warhead. But on the other hand, as you can see, this is happening at a different altitude, one that regular FPV drones might not be able to reach. And what's very important, as according to some sources, though this still needs to be clarified, this is happening at a very long distance. In this case, it's the Rostov region near Kutenikovo. And what is Kutenikovo? Well, basically, it's 200 kilometers from the line of contact.
The occupied territories were hit as well. Part of the Donetsk region was plunged into a total blackout, which partially paralyzed the command of Russian forces. Among more than a dozen successful strikes, the explosions in Dokuchaevsk are particularly noteworthy. Analysts are still debating whether the nighttime glow was the result of a strike on a power plant or an ammunition depot.
Whatever it was, either way, it's ultimately a blow to logistics. Because if a substation is destroyed, the group loses electricity. If the strike hits an ammunition depot, the group loses shells. This is important for the group that is currently advancing in Donetsk region. In other words, at the very least, it slows down their offensive potential.
At the same time, fighters on the ground confirm this information. In particular, due to intensified strikes on Russian logistics in the Donetsk region, assault units have lost their steady supply of reinforcements and weapons, and have lost momentum in their advance in Pokrovsk as well.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.